The old king, unable to have a son, invited a man to marry into the royal family, never expecting he was letting a wolf into the house. Just as the kingdom was on the brink of ruin, the pretty princess no one had faith in stepped forward. She snapped her own finger out of place, slipped free from her shackles, and began her road of counterattack. Hairpins, hammers, wooden sticks, curtains, lamp oil, all these ordinary things became deadly weapons in her hands. She took down the rebel army by herself, crowned herself, and became the first queen of the kingdom. It perfectly proves that old saying, "Who says women are inferior to men?" But this road, whether for a fairy tale princess or the woman warrior Mulan, has always been painfully hard. The word disappointment had followed the princess like a shadow from the moment she was born. The king had longed for a son, but was given a daughter. What made his headache even worse was that this daughter did not love dolls. Instead, she loved weapons and fighting. Without the slightest princess-like manner, the king was busy day and night, constantly occupied with affairs of state. The queen searched everywhere for secret formulas to bear a son, and had no time for anything else. Her parents' neglect instead gave the little princess a rare kind of freedom. She was always following Lin, begging her to teach her martial arts. At first, Lin thought the princess was only acting on a passing whim, but she never expected this training to become unstoppable. What was even more surprising was that the princess had incredible talent, the kind of martial arts prodigy seen maybe once in 100 years. So Lin made an exception, accepted her as a disciple, and taught her carefully. Before long, the queen became pregnant again, and the king was convinced this baby would be a son, so he pushed the princess even further out of his mind. But she did not sink into sadness just because her father did not cherish her and her mother did not love her. Instead, she ran and played wildly every day, climbing walls and scrambling over heights, unknowingly building a solid foundation in combat. But the good days did not last. After all her effort, the queen gave birth to another daughter. The king flew into a rage, and looked down even more on his eldest daughter, who had none of the grace of a proper young lady. But as she grew older and the kingdom grew weaker, he still could not produce a son, so he had no choice but to choose this desperate path and invite a son-in-law into the family. Of course, the princess did not want to become a tool for stabilizing the kingdom, and she begged her father to truly see her. She was fully capable of leading troops into battle and defending the country, so why should the fate of the kingdom and her life be handed to a stranger? But to the king, every word sounded outrageously rebellious. In his eyes, and in the larger world of that era, an unmarried woman should be gentle, dignified, and pleasing to look at. After marriage, she should support her husband, raise children, and manage the household. And as a princess, she should be the model standard for everyone else. But look at her, dressed like a warrior, holding a blade, talking about fighting and killing every time she opens her mouth. It was simply disgraceful. The king could no longer tolerate it, and sternly ordered her to put on a gown and quietly become a decorative bride-to-be, because that would be her greatest contribution to the country. Before long, the wedding took place as scheduled. The groom was Julius, the son of a diplomat with a suitable family background, carefully chosen by the king. But the princess could never get past the feeling in her heart, and her sixth sense told her this man was no good, so she ran away from the wedding in front of everyone, humiliated beyond belief. Julius led soldiers in a surprise attack on the palace that very night. The wedding festivities had not yet faded, the guards were relaxed, and everyone was careless, so he broke into the inner palace almost effortlessly. At the same time, several rebels burst into the princess's chambers and forced a drug down her throat. When she woke up, she found herself wearing that wedding dress again, with both hands firmly locked in chains. She looked around in confusion, not knowing where she was or what had happened, then got up in a daze, wanting to go to the window and see what was happening outside. Luckily, a sudden gust of cold wind jolted her awake, and only then did she see that beneath her feet was a terrifying drop. She quickly turned around to open the door, but no matter how hard she pushed or pulled, it would not move. An ominous feeling rose in her heart. Just then, footsteps came from outside the door. In desperation, the princess quickly lay back down and pretended to be asleep. The next second, two armored soldiers pushed open the door and walked in. Soldier A wanted to lean in and see how a pure, noble princess was different from a prostitute. Before he could finish speaking, the princess suddenly opened her eyes, slammed her head into the bridge of his nose, then sprang up and dodged to the side. Although she had caught them off guard, who would ever take a pampered princess under 5'3" seriously? Just as the two men laughed and prepared to tie her back onto the bed, the princess forced her own thumb out of joint. The soldiers looked at each other, wondering why this princess was hurting herself. Only when they saw her slip off the cuff did they finally understand. But so what? The price of underestimating her came very quickly. While the man retreated in pain, she quickly snapped her dislocated thumb back into place, then repeated the same trick, but the gap in strength was too great, and the soldier grabbed the chain, yanked hard, and slammed her heavily to the floor. While spewing filthy words, the soldier bent down to pick up the chain, wanting to drag her back to the bed. Using the force, the princess spun and kicked him in the knee, while Soldier B, watching the show from the side, thought his companion was only failing again and again because he was going easy on the pretty girl, until he saw a scene that left him stunned. The princess pulled out her hairpin and, using the momentum of her turn, drove it hard into the man's eye. Seeing his companion dead, Soldier B burned with rage and rushed over to end this farce. The princess moved as nimbly as a small beast darting across the floor. Unfortunately, her trailing gown became her stumbling block. The soldier yanked her in front of him, raised his hand, punched her, then followed with a brutal kick. Her fists hitting his body were like scratches, and the chain could not do any real damage either. At the critical moment, the princess suddenly had an idea. She quickly picked up the wooden stick on the floor and smashed it hard into the soldier's joint. In sharp pain, the soldier staggered back to the window, yet still had the nerve to mock her. She had just dealt with these two men, but the fierce sounds of the fight attracted the attention of patrolling soldiers. Pretending to sleep clearly would not work anymore. The princess quickly scanned the room, and her eyes locked onto the hammer leaning against the wall. Gritting her teeth, she lifted the hammer and hid behind the door, ready to ambush whoever came in. Only after confirming the intruder could no longer fight back did she finally let out a breath. Then she took the key from the man and finally removed those annoying shackles. But the princess was not in a rush to escape. Instead, she calmly began cleaning up the scene. She stuffed the bodies into the bedding, restored the furniture to its original place, then locked the door, creating the illusion that she was still inside the room. After that, she felt her way into a bathroom, pushed open the window, and the sight before her broke her heart. The entire palace had been taken by rebels, and her parents and little sister had become hostages. The guards and servants she once knew were either dead or wounded. Only when she clearly saw the rebel leader's face did she finally understand who had caused this catastrophe. Regret and self-blame overwhelmed her for a moment, but also ignited a fighting spirit unlike anything she had ever felt. She secretly resolved that she had to rescue her family. Just as she was racking her brain for a plan, a gladiator who desperately needed to pee pushed the door open and walked in. Just as we are wondering where the princess has hidden, the camera turns and gives us the answer. She never imagined that someone could spend this long in the bathroom. Even more awkwardly, she accidentally made a noise. Hearing the sound, the gladiator immediately turned around. Thankfully, his heavy iron helmet blocked his vision. Even more absurdly, he became fascinated by his own reflection in the mirror and stood there admiring himself for ages. Only after confirming he was still handsome and charming did he swagger out of the room. By now, the princess had reached her limit. She climbed out of the bathtub, panting, and nearly tripped again over the soaked hem of her dress. Furious, she simply tore it off and threw it aside, finally feeling much lighter. Then she crept out of the bathroom along the wall, planning to continue heading down the tower, but shadows moved at the end of the corridor, and rebels looting valuables were everywhere. Just as she tried to retreat, a huge hand like iron tongs clamped around her throat. He lifted her as easily as picking up a chick. At the edge of death, she struck both his ears at once and finally escaped his grip. But before she could even catch her breath, she got up and delivered a hard kick straight toward his weak point. Who would have thought that a move that had always worked before would completely fail this time? The gladiator did not even bother saying a word, drawing his long sword and slashing at her. The princess was unarmed and could only dodge and weave. She finally found an opening to counterattack, but could not hurt him at all, and even bounced herself away. It seemed this time things were truly looking grim, but at the very edge of life and death, she spotted a weakness. The gladiator had terrifying strength, but his movements were heavy and slow. She immediately changed strategy, no longer meeting force with force, but moving with his attacks and deflecting them. The gladiator thrust his sword and missed, driving it into the wall. The princess instantly kicked the weapon out of his hand. Against a gladiator who only knew brute force, the princess dodged and darted like a nimble monkey. The gladiator could not land a single hit, but what she did not expect was that his helmet was also a weapon. When he tried to headbutt her, the princess grabbed the two horns on his helmet and slammed him into the wall. Sparks flew along the way, and the horns actually jammed straight into the wall before he finally managed to pull them free. The completely enraged gladiator tried to ram straight through her. The princess twisted his helmet around, and the gladiator's vision went black, turning him into a blind bull. He rampaged wildly through the narrow corridor. In the chaos, the princess ripped off the helmet, and in the end, the deadly horned helmet became his own death warrant. Meanwhile, the body of guard number 2, kicked off the high tower by the princess, was discovered. Judging by the wounds on his body, it was clearly no accident. Julius immediately ordered the deputy beside him to check on the princess locked in the tower, but the deputy lazily curled his lip, thinking, what trouble could one little girl possibly cause? He casually called a guard over and sent him instead. At this moment, the princess hid inside a weaving room and finally got a chance to sit down and rest. But just as she tore off one puffy sleeve, someone else arrived. She grabbed a wooden stick for defense, but this thing was not lethal, so she kicked it in half, and in the next second, the sharp broken end drove deep into a rebel's right shoulder. After dealing with one, she immediately removed her corset belt, turning it into a weapon in her hand. The man mocked her, thinking she had no idea how to use it, so the princess taught him through action never to underestimate a woman. The princess picked up the dropped gear and continued downward, but just as she turned the corner, a squad of rebels suddenly surged up from the stairwell. With nowhere to hide, she flipped out the window in desperation, hanging onto the narrow ledge with her whole body. The long sword in her hand was too much in the way, so she had no choice but to drop it. As the footsteps inside faded into the distance, the princess tried to climb back in, only to find a guard sitting by the window taking a break and breathing heavily. Fortunately, she did not stay there for long. At the last second before her strength ran out, the princess finally climbed back inside. By then, both her arms felt like they no longer belonged to her. She was so exhausted she wanted to throw up, but did not dare stop for even a moment. The rebels roaming everywhere made every step difficult. Luckily, she knew the layout of the castle like the back of her hand. Through a hidden passage, she twisted and turned all the way back to her own bedroom. From under the bed, she found the treasured blade her teacher had given her, then took off her beautiful sandals, changed into combat boots, and returned to the secret passage. Halfway through, however, she suddenly heard someone discussing holding another wedding for her. She found the source of the voices, and through a crack, actually caught the groom in an affair. Moira was somewhat unhappy. The throne was already within reach, so why go through the unnecessary step of marrying the princess? Julius mocked her for having long hair but short vision. If he could take power legally, why carry the stain of a bad name? One wedding could silence public gossip. It could also suppress the armies resisting him, so why not do it? But he also knew Moira's little thoughts, and promised that once he was done using the princess, he would kill her entire family, and by then the queen's position would naturally be hers. Only then did the princess, who had been blaming herself all along, understand. Whether she married him or not, the kingdom would still have suffered this disaster. In an instant, her guilt over running from the wedding vanished, leaving only the desire to tear him to pieces. She felt her way to where the two of them were being intimate, slid the tip of her blade through a gap in the boards, aimed at the scumbag's head, and thrust forward. Unfortunately, at the critical moment, someone knocked on the door. Julius instantly lost interest, and the princess was so angry she cursed him in her heart. At the same time, the guard finally climbed to the top of the tower. He was so exhausted that even speaking was difficult, so he could only peek through the keyhole. The princess was lying on the bed, and the guard was asleep. Everything seemed fine, so he turned and went downstairs to report to his commander. When the princess heard they were going to see the king, she immediately followed. She moved through the secret passage, knocking as she went, until she finally found a loose vent. She twisted her body and crawled forward, when suddenly a giant sword came crashing down. Only then did she realize the Golden Knight was actually a living person. The princess quickly got up and fought. Her treasured blade was indeed sharp, cutting into the knight's greatsword with one strike, but the knight's armor was forged from special metal, and after several more slashes, she was the one shaken backward. The princess immediately changed strategy, aiming only for the soft spots the armor could not protect. The knight, hurt and furious, swung his sword wildly and forced the princess into a corner. She gritted her teeth, preparing to meet him head-on, but then her eyes landed on the oil jars. If physical damage could not deal with him, then she would use magic damage. The princess smashed the oil jar onto him, and the knight was still laughing, wondering what that could possibly do. But the next second, he was stunned. Raging flames swallowed him instantly, The armor that protected him ultimately became an oven. The guard ran breathlessly down to the base of the tower and reported that everything was normal.
You sure?
Deal with this now.
The commander immediately ordered them to search the tower floor by floor. Moira thought that was not enough, and wanted the entire castle turned upside down. Underestimating women seems to be a common flaw among all men, and any consequences that follow are entirely their own fault. These men no longer dared act out of line, and obediently did as they were told. The princess, who had already descended to the middle of the tower, was soon discovered. 3 rebels rushed at her from different directions. Outnumbered, the princess took a diagonal slash to her left arm. Seeing the situation turn against her, she pretended to run, stretching out the battle line and defeating them one by one. At this moment, a large group of rebels surged up from below, and no matter how well she could fight, she could not hold back dozens of men. Suddenly, inspiration struck, and she snapped the pearl necklace from her neck, scattering it across the stairs, causing the charging rebels to fall one after another like dominoes. She then stepped across the scattered shields and leapt over them, but as soon as she descended one more level, rebels swung up on ropes to chase her. After that, 1 came and she killed 1, 2 came and she killed 2, but more and more people were closing in from every side. Her strength gradually began to fail, and her wounds grew more numerous, leaving only willpower to keep her going. If this fight dragged on, death was the only way it would end, so she went all in and risked everything. The princess temporarily escaped the encirclement, but it was only a matter of time before those men caught up. At that moment, she felt a little hopeless, but when she turned around, the flag fluttering outside the window made her eyes light up. She hardened her heart, sheathed her blade, sprinted forward, and leapt. After grabbing the flag, the princess ran back and forth along the wall, using the swing of the banner to fling herself into a room. At that moment, her whole body felt like it had fallen apart, and she lay on the floor for quite a while before struggling to stand. But the moment she straightened up, a sharp pain exploded from her left abdomen. She hid in a corner and roughly bandaged the wound. But before she could rest for even a moment, she heard someone push the door open and rush in. The princess instantly entered combat mode. As the figure approached, she pressed the person to the floor with lightning speed. But when she looked closely, the person who had come was none other than her teacher, Lynn. Last night, when the rebels stormed the castle, they caught everyone completely off guard. In the chaos, Lynn hid and was lucky enough to escape. From her teacher, the princess learned that her family was being held deep in the dungeon, and the only quick path there was the foul-smelling sewer behind the kitchen. The 2 dared not delay and set off immediately, but as soon as they slipped into the kitchen, they saw several rebels bullying a maid tending the fire. For the master and student to deal with these small fry was as easy as anything. But just then, Moira appeared. This woman was not only vicious and ruthless, but also terrifyingly strong in combat. Her long whip cracked through the air with brutal force. The master and student were completely suppressed and could not get close. The princess lost focus for just a moment, and the whip wrapped tightly around her neck. Her whole body was lifted directly into the air. Fortunately, Lynn intervened in time and pulled her back from death's door. Lynn knew the princess's time was precious and could not be delayed, so she grabbed a jar of strong liquor from the stove and splashed it toward the fireplace. With a boom, flames rose into the air, and the wall of fire temporarily blocked the female demon. Lynn shoved the princess away and urged her to go, while she stayed behind to cover her escape. The princess slid down the sewer through the rushing water and successfully reached the dungeon. The rebels in charge of guarding the place were drinking and gambling, having the time of their lives. Exhausted and starving, the princess walked straight up, snatched a cup of wine, and began drinking. Everyone froze, wondering who this person was. The princess calmly gestured for them to sit down and not disturb her. After finishing a full cup, she even let out a long burp. The next second, she smashed the cup straight into a man's head. Then she snatched a sword and quickly dealt with all these useless soldiers. The king watched in stunned disbelief. The princess opened the dungeon gate, ready to take her family out. But the next second, someone knocked her unconscious with a staff. When she woke up again, her entire family was neatly in Julius's hands. Seeing her cry so beautifully, Julius thought they were tears of regret and tenderly wiped them away. Who knew she would suddenly open her mouth and bite him, nearly taking off his hand? Julius said he had never seen a woman like this. What exactly made her this way?
I was born this way.
You were born to be my wife.
I look forward to it at your service every night. It's like something out of a fairy tale.
Julius thought the princess had come around and looked at her expectantly, telling her to go on. As he wished, the princess began describing their happy married life.
You'll learn to sleep with one eye open. To never turn your back. I'll be in heaven, just thinking day and night of ways to kill you. Until I'm standing above your corpse, holding in my delicate, manicured hands your still beating heart.
Looking at this woman covered in blood, Julius knew she was not lying, and because of that, he felt even more chilled to the bone, so he shifted his target to the easier-to-control little princess. He thought his plan was clever, unaware that her sister was the princess's ultimate trigger. If the princess who had fought her way down the tower had been as fierce as a lion, then the woman now completely enraged was a fearless goddess of war. The princess suddenly exploded into a counterattack, catching them completely off guard. In the chaos, Lin picked up the little princess and turned to run. The bound princess was quickly restrained by soldiers, lifted up, and thrown straight out the window into the sea outside the castle. In that instant, she felt not the slightest fear of death. Instead, an indescribable relief surged through her. She could finally close her eyes and rest, but just as her consciousness was about to sink, the faces of her family appeared one by one before her eyes, and the fate of the whole kingdom, along with the hopeful eyes of countless subjects, all pressed down on her shoulders. How could she sleep at the bottom of the sea? The princess pulled the rope around to the front, then used broken glass to slowly cut it, finally swimming to the surface with her last breath. But just as she returned to the castle, she ran into a massive figure head-on. It seemed another hard fight was unavoidable. The princess immediately took a fighting stance, but before she could move, the man was taken down by Lin. After the three reunited, they went all the way to the castle treasury, where all kinds of weapons were stored. Lin chose a bow and arrows to carry with her. The princess picked up a sharp sword. Even the little sister chose a set of gear for herself.
What do you think? I want to fight too.
You know, I once knew a princess that said the exact same thing at your age.
But you got to do it.
And you will too. I will see to it myself, I promise. But until then...
Hidden, quiet, alive.
Yes, that's my girl.
They told the little sister to hide there, and once they dealt with the rebels outside, they would come back for her immediately. At this moment, Julius had brought the king, queen, and nobles into the ceremonial hall. He was only waiting for his men to bring the little princess, and then he would immediately hold the wedding and coronation. Unfortunately, he did not get his bride. Instead, he got the unstoppable older sister who had fought her way through everyone. Lin became an archer, taking out rebels from a distance. The princess became a warrior, engaging the rebels in close combat. The two fought all the way to the entrance of the hall. Moira personally entered the battle, whip in hand. At first, Moira truly managed to suppress the princess with the advantage of her attack range, but once the princess got close, Moira was no match. The princess seized the whip, wrapped it several times around Moira's neck, then threw it up high over the iron frame and pulled down hard with her entire body weight. The weapon Moira was so proud of became her own hanging rope. When the princess rushed into the hall, Lin was already covered in blood, collapsed on the floor and unable to move. In the end, Julius still used the method he had once despised the most and put on the crown. At this moment, he no longer wanted any gentle policy, only to kill this family as quickly as possible. He wanted to prove that his position could not be shaken. The two exchanged blade after blade, fighting with extreme intensity. But this man had no honor, and actually used a dagger to ambush the princess, making her already battered body even worse. With nowhere to retreat and nowhere to hide, the princess fought with everything she had, but her weapon was knocked flying. Julius grabbed her by the throat, threw her in front of everyone, and roared that anyone who dared resist would end up like this. Just as he was getting carried away, the princess snatched the long sword from his hand and cut off his head. The princess limped over, picked up the crown, and returned it to her father. After everything that had happened, the old king, who had always favored sons over daughters, finally realized that the right to inherit should be decided by ability, not gender, so he announced that he would pass the throne to his daughter. The most moving power of this film does not lie in how the princess fights alone through the tower against hundreds of enemies, though that is certainly exciting. that is still a familiar female hero trope within a male-style narrative. What truly earns admiration is that the princess remains loyal to who she really is from beginning to end. If she likes martial arts, she keeps practicing. If she likes armor, she wears it every day. If she does not like someone, she refuses to settle. I am a movie enthusiast, and I look forward to our next encounter.